The fire burned before him but did not consume the plant. The strange glow danced over the dry bush, and the air around it seemed to vibrate with something Moses had never felt before. "Moses, Moses," said a voice that did not come from outside but from within him. The whole desert fell silent. The wind stopped, the birds disappeared, and for a moment, the only thing that existed was the presence calling him. Moses approached, trembling. The ground burned beneath his feet, and a phrase echoed like thunder. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." It was the same desert where he thought he had been forgotten, the same place where he believed God had gone silent. But that night, Moses would discover the secret the desert had hidden, and that secret would change not only his life, but the destiny of an entire people. Before reaching that moment, Moses had lived among luxury and power. Raised in the heart of Egypt, he knew the glory of palaces and the weight of royalty. He wore fine linen, was served by attendants, and learned the laws of the pharaohs. But inside him, something always burned, a voice reminding him he did not belong to that land. He saw his people enslaved, whipped, humiliated, and it broke him, until one day, in a moment of fury, he killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew. That was the end of everything. The prince of Egypt became a fugitive, and when he crossed the borders and stepped into the desert for the first time, he believed his calling had ended. For 40 years, Moses vanished. The man who once knew power now hid among livestock and dust. He became a shepherd, living in tents, far from voices, far from crowds, far from any glory. Every sunrise in the desert looked the same. The sun rose, burned, then died, and nothing changed. He began to believe silence was the answer, that maybe God had already given up on him. But the desert is never just silence. The desert is where God speaks without words, shapes without touching, and prepares without announcing. The mornings always began with the same sound, the distant bleating of sheep, the dry wind scraping against the stones, and the crackling of worn leather covering his tent. Moses walked slowly, guiding Jethro's flock across the rocky hills of Midian. The sand rose beneath his feet, and the horizon seemed to mock his loneliness. It was as if the desert swallowed him whole, erasing any memory of the man who had once been a prince. No servant called his name, no voice honored him. All that remained was the sound of his own breath, mixed with the echo of nothingness. Sometimes, while watching the sunset paint the desert red, Moses thought about how the glory of Egypt faded quickly in memory. The golden columns, the palace halls, the thrones, everything felt like an old dream. He wondered if God still saw him, if God still remembered the boy rescued from the water, the impetuous young man who fought for justice. But silence was the only response. Silence and wind. During the long nights, the cold cut like a blade. Moses wrapped himself in cloaks, looking at the sky covered with stars. At times he imagined each star was a promise, one he wasn't sure would still be fulfilled. The desert had a cruel way of testing faith, not by taking hope at once, but letting it dry slowly like a plant without water. And yet there was something in the desert that drew him in. Solitude forced him to look inward. He began to hear sounds he had never noticed before. The wind whispering between rocks, the crackling of dry wood, the breathing of sleeping sheep. It was as if the world spoke in codes and God hid in every detail. Moses didn't know it yet, but the silence surrounding him was the very language of preparation. Time passed, and the man who once acted impulsively began learning the power of waiting. He understood that not every absence is abandonment, some are training. He learned not to despair when nothing happened, not to run when life seemed still. In the desert, time isn't measured by days, but by transformation. Each scar in Moses' soul was quietly healed. The desert cleansed him from the inside, removing pride, fear, and control. It was as if God emptied him little by little until only the essential remained, and in that emptiness, the invisible began to work. Sometimes when the wind changed direction, Moses felt something different, a shiver, a presence, an uneasiness, not fear, but a silent expectation. He looked at the horizon and sensed something was coming, but the desert returned to its silence as if saying, "Not yet." He learned that God does not work at human speed. While Moses wanted answers, God wanted maturity. While Moses waited for a sign, God prepared the moment, and that moment would come, not with trumpets, but with fire. His body aged, but his spirit grew lighter. He began to see beauty in the simple, the smell of dry grass, the sound of sheep, the moonlight on the rocks. The same man who once had everything now found contentment in the essential. And that contentment was the greatest sign that his heart was ready. On some mornings, he talked to himself, telling stories to the sheep, as if he needed to hear his own voice, to remember he still existed. He told them about Egypt, about the Nile, the gods and temples. The sheep stared back, chewing slowly, indifferent, but the habit kept him alive. The last tie to a past that felt as distant as the sound of the Nile in that endless sand. Some days, the desert tested him cruelly. Hunger came, water ran out, heat made him dizzy. He learned to find shade under rocks, to dig for roots to survive. And even on those days, an invisible strength sustained him. Something inside insisted, it's not over. And as time passed, the desert began to change appearance. What once felt like punishment now became a school. What once was silence now became a voice. Moses realized the desert did not push him away from God, it brought him closer. He learned to listen to the sound of his own steps and to value the space between breaths. It was there, in that slow rhythm, that God wrote what was coming. Moses didn't know it, but the waiting was almost over. One day, while guiding the flock through a rocky valley, something on the horizon drew his attention. A flickering light, as if the sun had broken in two. Curious, he approached. The desert was quiet, but the light pulsed. Then he saw it, a bush on fire, yet not burning. The heat was intense, but the air was cool. Moses froze, heart racing. Then he heard his name, Moses. The voice didn't come from the fire. It came from everywhere, the wind, the sand, his own heart. Moses, he trembled, looked around, answered, "Here I am." The voice continued, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Moses obeyed, fell to his knees, face covered with dust and tears. He finally understood. The God he thought was distant had always been there, waiting for him to stop running. The fire burned without consuming, and inside Moses something also ignited. The desert, the silence, the loneliness, everything made sense now. The desert had not been the end of his story, but the beginning of his calling. Before him, the fire burned, and from it, a voice said, "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt, and I have come down to rescue them. Now go, for I am sending you." Imagine the weight of that. The same man who fled in fear now had to return. The desert he thought was a punishment was, in fact, training. Every day of isolation, every forgotten tear, every sunset without answers, all part of the preparation. The secret the desert hid was this: God does not use the strong, he uses the broken. And Moses now was exactly that, a man broken enough to obey without argument. When Moses returned to Egypt, he was no longer the same. Egypt still stood in its arrogance, with its gods and idols. But Moses carried within him the fire from Horeb. Egypt saw a shepherd, but inside him burned a flame that did not die. And that flame confronted Pharaoh. Without sword, without army, his faith was the fire. Then came the plagues. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs covered the land. Darkness swallowed Egypt. Each plague struck down a false god. But more than a battle between Moses and Pharaoh, it was a spiritual war. The man of the desert now challenged an empire, and he won, not by strength, but by presence. When the people finally left, the desert returned as the setting. But now Moses saw it differently. The place that once meant escape now became the path to promise. The dry ground that once symbolized shame now became the stage of miracles. Columns of fire, manna from heaven, water from the rock. Everything in the desert screamed a single truth Moses carried forever: miracles are born in scarcity. But not everyone understood this. The people complained, murmured, wanted to go back. They saw sand, but Moses saw purpose. They saw hunger. He saw faith being forged. The desert taught Moses to see the invisible, to trust with no signs, to walk when everything screamed for him to stop. He learned God does not reveal the destination at once, only one step at a time. Years later, on Mount Sinai, Moses climbed again. The people stayed below, terrified by smoke and thunder. But Moses knew what it meant. The same fire from Horeb now surrounded him completely. Up there, among lightning and clouds, the final secret was revealed. The fire was never in the bush. It was in him. The desert had only awakened it. When he descended, his face shone. The light was so strong no one could look at him directly. They saw the glow, but not the lonely nights, the unanswered prayers, the silent pains. The shine was the reflection of someone who crossed the desert and found God inside himself. That is the secret the desert hid, the same secret hidden in yours, because we all go through deserts, seasons of silence, waiting, loss, loneliness. And when that happens, it's easy to think God forgot us. But the desert is not the end. It is the womb of a new promise, the place where God removes everything that keeps the fire from burning. So if you're in your desert right now, if everything feels dry, if the heavens feel shut, if the silence hurts more than sound, understand, the same God who called Moses still speaks to those who stay. Sometimes he doesn't answer because he is shaping you. Sometimes he doesn't appear because he's already inside you. And when the right time comes, the fire will ignite. And perhaps this video found you for exactly this reason, to remind you the desert is not punishment, it's preparation. And the voice you think you can't hear is about to call your name. If this message spoke to you, write in the comments, "I will cross my desert," and subscribe, because every story here is a new spark of faith. Those who listen until the end discover that even God's silence has a sound.